Continuing Mr. Orth's flip classroom for grammar, looking at what is an adverb. Reminder that modifiers are any type of words that give information about or modify the meanings of other words. We've already looked at adjectives and how they modify or just add details to nouns or pronouns. Now let's look at adverbs, which modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. There's two main types of adverbs. Descriptors, which look at how, when, and where. You can argue they also explain a little bit about why, but not nearly as often. When you're trying to find an adverb, generally speaking, they're going to describe the how of something, the when of something, and the where of something. The other category is called intensifiers. They answer the question to what extent. The poster child for intensifiers is the word vary. Simply put, if you can replace a word in a sentence with the word vary, V-E-R-Y, and vary works in that spot, then what you replaced is an intensifying adverb. Any word you can use as a synonym for that, and effectively in the same sentence, is going to be an adverb. How do we use these? Look familiar from this chapter? Find your verb and subject first so you can understand the sentence. That hasn't changed. We still want to make sure we have clarity on what the main idea of the sentence is before we start looking at individual words beyond that. Now we want to locate all modifiers in a sentence, any describing words whatsoever. This is especially helpful if you're looking at a test where it's not categorized only as adjectives in one part or adverbs in another, but if you're asked to describe them at the same time. Then, find all words modified. Still recommend drawing arrows to those words. Will there be times you can't necessarily figure out which words to draw an arrow to? Yes, absolutely. But for now, let's start with that. Remember that adjectives modify nouns. So if you've drawn an arrow from a describing word to a noun, unless you've drawn an arrow to the incorrect word, then the word that you're drawing the arrow from to that noun is going to be an adjective. It also applies to pronouns. Remember that adverbs, generally speaking, are most commonly formed by adding ly to an existing word. This doesn't necessarily mean that any word that ends in ly is an adverb. Simple example is the word fly. If you take off ly, whatever's left, if it's actually a word, tells you that the ly form is an adverb. If you take off ly and what you've left isn't a word, or it's not nearly the same meaning of that original word, then the ly version isn't necessarily an adverb. So the word fly, take off ly and you have which not only is not a word, it might be an awkward noise to make in public. Or if you have quickly, take off the ly from the word quickly, you have the word quick. It's also helpful to distinguish between adjectives and adverbs. If you have a describing word and there's an ly form of that word, the ly form is going to be the adverb. The version that doesn't have the ly is most likely going to be an adjective. If you can't find the word modified, then you want to make sure you ask which question is being answered. What is being described? If a word is describing a who or a what, and a what can actually be a place, as in a home or a park or a city. If it's describing a who or a what, then that word you found to begin with is an adjective, even if you can't necessarily determine which word to draw an arrow to. Likewise, if you have a word that's describing or explaining about where, when, why, or how. Again, why far less often, but it might not be a bad idea to have it in the mix. If it's describing a where, as in outdoors or down the street, even if it's a word or a phrase, it's doing the job of an adverb. It's important to remember that later on when we get into other kinds of phrases and even clauses. An example, slippery snakes slither sneakily into quite quiet quilts. Sorry, working on poetry in my other classes right now, so alliteration kind of creeps in. So let's start by figuring out what's the verb. Well, the verb is slither. Sneakily describes how they slither. It's just if you draw an arrow, sneakily draws an arrow to the word slither. Do you need sneakily in a sentence? No. The reality is, just as you don't need adjectives in a sentence, you also don't need adverbs. Sure, if you have a word like not, which is technically an adverb, it's going to change the meaning dramatically of the sentence, but it doesn't change the grammar of the sentence not to have an adverb. If we ask who or what slithers, the snakes. So snakes is a simple subject. Other describing words. Quiet describes the quilts. So quilts is a noun, okay, and quiet describes that noun, therefore it's an adjective. By the way, because we have the word into, which is a preposition, quilts is actually also the object of the preposition. Don't worry if that wasn't on your mind during this lesson, though. Quite. Well, can you replace quite with very? Well, sure you can. Very quiet quilts. In which case, that makes it into an adverb because it's replaceable by very. And also, if you've forgotten, slippery, since it's describing snakes, it's describing a noun, therefore slippery is also an adjective. This takes a little bit more time in order to find all these describing words and go from there. But you can do it. Be patient, ask for help, and keep checking with your teacher to see if you're making progress. Good hunting.